friends, welcome back to Belle's Library. Today I am here hanging out in a new location to tell you a little bit about some of the spring books I'm hoping to read. So this is kind of a spring TBR for the next few months, and I just thought, let's be outside because today is like in the 70s. It is so beautiful and gorgeous, and I'm so excited for this spring weather that is going to be coming around soon. Oh my gosh, it is going to be so lovely. And you know, it's going to get cold again next week. So this is short-lived at the moment, but I'm going to soak it in while I can. But before we jump into what's going to be really happening in this video and all that fun stuff, go ahead and click subscribe down below for me. And also I've got my Goodreads, Instagram, and Storygraph down there so we can talk bookish on all the different platforms. I would absolutely love to talk to you guys more about all of the wonderful books that are coming out, that we're reading, all that good stuff. So go ahead and do that really fast. And now let's go ahead and talk about how I've kind of got this video structured for you guys. So we're about to start spring. It's coming up soon. I figured, what does spring really like bring out in me for reading? It's not as defined as like summer and fall and even winter. Like, I was just like, what am I thinking right now? But as it's getting a little bit more spring weather, I'm thinking like new beginnings, fresh things that are starting, you're finding yourself, nature and outdoors. Like those are some of the things I'm thinking of at first. And a few other things kind of crept in there. So I have about 4 different areas that I'm kind of want to read out of and that I'm in the mood for this spring. And as I was building my TBR and looking at what I had on my shelves and on Goodreads, you know, I started just kind of putting some books in there that felt kind of spring vibes for me. And I've got 4 categories, but then also I started like, oh, you know, I feel like this really fits in here that I have read that has been really great. So I've just got like, I'm not going to really give a ton of details on recommendations that I'm going to give you, but just, I don't know, I felt like talking about some of these other books that kind of fall into these categories that I have enjoyed, just real quick. So it's almost kind of like a recommendation video here as well, but it's not really going to take up as much as my spring TBR content for this video, but you'll kind of see as we get rolling. So let me go ahead and tell you the 4 categories that I'm kind of got going right now. So one of them is YA contemporaries. For whatever reason, I'm just in the mood for some good YA contemporary, and I feel like also that's really a time of life when you are finding yourself a lot and kind of finding your voice and who you are, and I think that kind of screams spring to me. Everything's fresh and new and starting again, and so I kind of have a category that's YA contemporary. I also have magical realism in here. I feel like you kind of get the YA contemporary vibes a lot of times with some of that, but a little bit of some magic sprinkled in, and it's just kind of a lighter, fun time with fantasy that's not like quite as dark and dreary, but you still have some conflict and different stuff going on. So magical realism, I just feel like also fits. So that's another category. Then I have kind of more fairy tale retelling slash nature. I have a couple books here that I kind of started with this idea of like nature and spring and flowers and stuff like that, and it kind of turned into also a little bit of some fairy tale retelling stuff. I feel like with fairy tale retellings, they're some of my favorite fantasy because a lot of times I get those great fantasy vibes, but they're not quite as heavy or as hard to read. They're a little bit lighter and enjoyable in different ways, but you still do get some topics to talk about, and it's still a really fun and interesting fantasy read. I don't know if that makes sense to you guys, but I've got a couple books there. And my last category is probably all me. I don't know that people would kind of associate spring with this category, but podcast books. I read my first set of podcast books around this time last year. I did a video on it, and I just fell in love with the idea of podcasts in books. And now I just associate it with springtime. And so I would love to read some more podcast books this spring. So I've got a few options there as well. And do I think I'm going to get to all of these books this spring? I don't know, because, you know, Belle's Bookland often makes it a little difficult. And then I've also got other TBR videos. or not TBR videos, but, you know, reading vlogs and stuff that kind of veer my reading in different directions. So do I ever know what I'm going to be reading in a couple months? I try, but not usually. But I feel like I'm going to try and get at least a good chunk of these read in the next few months. So you'll have to let me know what you guys are thinking and feeling for the spring. What do you guys like to read in the springtime? Let me know down below. But let's go ahead and jump in and start talking about some of the lovely books that I'm thinking about reading this spring. So we'll go ahead and start with kind of the more, I don't know how to explain it exactly, category of nature and fairy tale retellings kind of mixed together vibes. I have two in this category, and the first one that I have here is Nettle and Bone, I'll put it here, by T. Kingfisher. I have actually read a kind of horror novel by him before, but I haven't read a fantasy, and this one kind of veers more towards the fantasy side. I honestly am not sure that this is actually a fantasy or a fairy tale retelling, but it just has some fairy tale type vibes to me that kind of fit that vibe, that feeling. But we're following Mara, and she has been watching her sister getting abused for years by this prince, and it's becoming apparent to her that there is no one that's coming to rescue them, and so she's gonna have to go out and figure this out herself. So she kind of enlists the help of this grave witch, who basically says, I will help give you all the tools you need to defeat the prince, but you have to complete 3 impossible tasks first. So it's kind of her quest as she's going through these 3 different tasks and trying to defeat this prince in the end. The part that I found really just kind of interesting is it says, the quest will include Mara, the grave witch, who is a reluctant fairy godmother, and a former knight, and also a chicken possessed by a demon. What does that even mean? That just sounds super different and interesting, and I just want to know what is happening. And I will say that the cover kind of gives me Peter Pan vibes, although the actual story does not. And I'm not a big Peter Pan fan usually, but like it just the cover gives me these like naturey vibes. That's what kind of pulled me in at first. And then I was reading it and I was like, this kind of almost has fairy tale vibes. I don't know. It sounded like something perfect for the spring. I will put the release date on this because I know it's not out quite yet, but I'm pretty sure it's coming out this spring. I'll throw it here for you guys. My other fairy tale retelling is Blanca and Roja. I guess it could be E. It's just like the little and sign, and I don't know. I always want to say it like that. And this is actually a Swan Lake retelling. So we have these 2 sisters, Blanca and Roja, and they are very opposite. So we've got Blanca, she's kind of the more obedient and I guess good one. And then we have Roja, who is a little bit more vicious and manipulative. And these 2 sisters have basically a rivalry between the 2 of them, and also a generations long spell has been cast on this family, and they are kind of connected to these swans. And basically it's been told that these 2 sisters are going to get pulled into some stuff with the swans, and one of them will remain a girl at the end of it, and the other one will basically be bonded into the body of one of the swans. So, I don't know, it sounds kind of different. I haven't read a Swan Lake retelling, and I don't really remember a ton about this particular kind of fairy tale, but I've always wanted to read something by Anne-Marie McLemore, so I am massively intrigued here. So we'll see how kind of that one goes, but those are my 2 in that first category. So our next category we're going to head into is probably my largest category, and that is that YA contemporary kind of finding your own self kind of vibes. I do have some kind of more contemporary romance mixed in here as well, but that's going to be this next chunk. And I started with 5 on my TBR here, but I think I added a couple in while I was going through my bookshelves. I don't know, we'll see. Let's just jump in here. So the first one that I have up here is The Astonishing Color of After. And this cover is just so colorful and beautiful. I just think it looks gorgeous, but I've also heard amazing things about this book. I know that it is a little bit more hard-hitting, but I've just heard really beautiful things. So we're following Lee, and she believes that her mom turned into a bird after she committed suicide. So she ends up traveling to Taiwan to stay with her maternal grandmother for a little while, and this is actually the first time that she is meeting her. And while she's there, she's on the lookout for this bird that she believes is her mother. But while she's there, she kind of ends up chasing ghosts. She ends up making a new bond with her grandma that, this is a new person in her life. So she's kind of creating some of those family bonds. She's learning some of the family secrets that she didn't know about. And it's kind of a whole journey for her. Another big part of her journey here is that she's kind of dealing with the fact that when she was finally having her first kiss with her longtime crush, her mom was taking her life. And that is like heartbreaking, just even thinking about this and how much she probably blames and takes on herself in, I'm sure, a very wrong way, but is going to be a big part of the book, I'm sure. So this sounds beautiful, and I am excited to get into it, although I may need some tissues nearby, for sure. The next book I put on this list, I saw the cover in my Goodreads, and I was like, oh my gosh, this is just screaming to read during the spring. That cover, and then I knew that it was one that I really wanted to get to anyways, and was very intrigued by, so I was just like, oh, this has got to go on the TBR. And that's A Cuban Girl's Guide to Tea and Tomorrow. So Lila kind of has this plan. After graduation, she's going to take over as the head baker from her abuela at their panaderia, and also move in with her best friend and live happily ever after with her boyfriend. But her parents have other plans, and they end up sending her for a few months over the summer to England to stay with some family and friends. They really think this is going to help her mental health. And so this is like a nightmare to her, right? She is like, I don't want this. I've got plans, I've got ideas. But then she gets to England and she meets Orion, who he has some issues of his own, but he's kind of taken it upon himself to show her around and help her on this journey. And he really just wants to help Lila kind of get out of her funk. And so they are going to go explore England together. And, she's kind of getting some new plans in mind in her future, possibly. I think this just sounds super cute and adorable, and I'm really excited by the idea of getting into this one. The next one that I have on here is by Miss Morgan Matson, and that's Since You've Been Gone. I also have Save the Date by her on my bookshelf. I would love to read more by her. This is where I've kind of got a recommendation. I really enjoyed Amy and Roger's Epic Detour by her, and so if you haven't read Morgan Matson, I do definitely recommend this one. It's a really fun road trip, finding yourself, romance, and our main character just lost her dad as well, so she's dealing with some of that. And I also enjoy the fact that in here you've got some mixed media type stuff. There's receipts and maps and playlists and different stuff from their road trip across the US. So that one's a really fun one if you want to try out some other Morgan Matson books, or you haven't tried her yet. I definitely recommend. But I've got a couple more of her books on my bookshelf that I'd really love to get to. So Since You've Been Gone, this one we have Sloane, who has kind of helped Emily really come out of her shell. She gets her to have fun. They're like best friends. But then Sloane up and disappears. And the only thing she leaves behind is this list of things for Emily to do. And there's 13 tasks on here, things that Emily just would never do. And so one of them is like apple picking at night or kissing a stranger. And so she kind of decides, Emily, to go on this journey to try and complete these tasks, because what if she completes them and then Sloane comes back? And so we're following her journey, going through all of these things that were left behind by her best friend and trying to figure out what happened to the best friend. And I think it's just going to be a beautiful journey for Emily, and I'm excited to get into it. And then we have Save the Date, which I kind of was like, oh, I also have this one. I'm going to grab it and put it in here because it's great, but I totally forget what it's about. Charlie's sister is getting married. Everyone is coming home, all her older siblings. It'll be just like it used to be, one last weekend together before her parents sell the house. Charlie doesn't want to think about college next year or things changing. She just wants to make this a perfect weekend. What could go wrong? Well, first the wedding planner quits, then the house alarm won't stop going off, Charlie's biggest crush shows up unannounced, there's a missing tuxedo, an unexpected dog, and a neighbor bent on destruction. So it sounds like this big day just really goes south. And so this one sounds kind of a little bit lighter and more fun, versus this one sounds like it might be a little bit more hard-hitting. So these might be a fun pair to read together. So then we have Miss Nina LaCour, which I adore her writing. It is so wonderful and beautiful. And this is The Disenchantments, which I'm not sure I've heard anybody really talk about, but I am really intrigued by it because I just love her and her writing. But we are following Colby and Bev. So they have plans after graduation that they're going to go out on the road with Bev's band and travel around and then take a year and go travel around Europe and different stuff like that. But then Bev kind of drops this bomb right before they're supposed to be headed out on this big adventure and says, actually, I'm going to go to school in the fall, so I'm kind of not going to do our plan at all. And so Colby is kind of like, what the heck? What am I supposed to do here? So she goes out as a roadie with the band and is kind of going around to all these dingy bars and different places where they're playing, and she's just trying to figure out what's next. I just think this sounds so wonderful. I know that Nina LaCour will do a wonderful job with it, and it's kind of just seems like it's going to give me some just lighter, sunshiny vibes. Like, this cover just screams happiness to me, although I'm sure there will be something more that will hit me, but I am excited. And as far as a recommendation, I adore We Are Okay by Nina LaCour, my favorite by her so far that I've read. This one's definitely not as light and fluffy, but if you want to check out a Nina LaCour book, this one is so good. So I definitely would check this one out. All right, and the last book in this section that I would like to get on my TBR is The Map from Here to There by Emery Lord. So in this one, we're following Paige, and she just feels like she's got the perfect life right now. She's got a great summer job. She's got an awesome boyfriend, great best friends. She's just living the life. And she's kind of like, what if I don't want to keep going? I don't want to go ahead to college. I don't want to continue because life is just so happy right now. And so we're going to be kind of following her journey through all of that. And I have enjoyed some books by Emery Lord as well. And so I'm excited to see a little bit more of what she has. So as far as a book by her that I would recommend is The Names They Gave Us. And this one is a little bit more hard-hitting, I'm guessing, than this one. Obviously, I haven't read this one, but we are following a girl who just found out that her mom's cancer has come back, and she's trying to deal with some of her feelings revolving around that. And also, she heads out to a summer camp and is kind of meeting some new friends and such out there as well. So I also would say, if you've read this and enjoyed it, I just finished Everything Beautiful Is Not Ruined by Danielle Young Ullman, and they both follow these camps where the main character is going for at-risk youth and some stuff going on there, and kind of their journey as they're finding themselves and trying to overcome some other familial issues going on as well. And so I definitely really, really, really loved this one too. So these are both wonderful and I would recommend. And just separately, on the YA contemporary, like if you want a YA contemporary, pick up Elizabeth Espedo. She is one of my favorite writers. She's so good, and her books are wonderful. The Poet X is amazing. You're getting a great story about Xiomara finding her voice through slam poetry, and then we have With the Fire on High. We're following our, oh, what's her name? We're following Amoni in this one, and she is a single mom. She's trying to finish up her last year of high school and try and find a balance of trying to take care of her daughter and be a part of her family life, as well as, you know, start to try and look at what she wants to do with the rest of her life. And it is just, she has great writing. It's beautiful. Definitely recommend her books. So the next category that we will kind of run into here is the magical realism category. So I started with 2 books in this category, but then as I was going through my shelves, I saw a couple more books. So now we have like 4 books, but that's okay. The more books, the merrier, you know, it's all good. So the first book I have on this list here is A Snake Falls to Earth by Darcy Little Badger. I read Alatsaway last year, was it, by her? It might have been the year before. Wow, has it been that long? Anyways, I really need to get to her next book here. It sounds wonderful. In this one, we have Nina, and she's a Lipan from our world. And she has always felt like there's a little bit more to this world, and she believes in the old stories and everything going on there. And then we have Ollie, and he is a cottonmouth, and he's from the land of spirits and monsters. And he is cast from his home, which is apparently normal in that realm. And he ends up making a new home on the banks of the bottomless bottomless lake. These two, they don't know each other. They've never known each other, but their paths are going to kind of converge and collide once Nina's best friend kind of gets this strange sickness and just some weird stuff starts happening. But there's also a lot of people out there who don't want them to meet and don't want them to be together, and they are even willing to kill to stop this from happening. So there's definitely something else going on as well in this. I really enjoyed the way Darcy Little Badger kind of writes her stories. It's just a certain storytelling that is just beautiful and wonderful, and I'm excited to see what else she has. So this one sounds really great. And then the next one I have is The Wild Ones by Nafisa Azad. And in this one, we're following Baheli, and basically her mom like tricks her and like exchanges her and sells her out to get some kind of something in return. But she ends up in this awful situation and she escapes and she gets away and she runs into this boy with stars in his eyes, and he gives her this box of stars, and this box of stars is kind of a gateway to the between where pure magic kind of lives, and she's able to use these stars to travel around the world and start collecting these girls and saving them from these hopeless, awful situations, and they become the wild ones, and they all go out and just try to help all of these girls. And so they end up getting threatened because this boy who had given her all these stars starts actually getting into some trouble. Somebody is tracking and finding him. And so if he loses his freedom, then in a lot of ways, they're going to lose theirs. And they're not okay with that. They're never going to let that happen again. So that's the kind of the story we're following here. And I think it's going to have some really great topics in here. And the cover is gorgeous. And it just sounds very inspiring. And I am dying to get to it. Now, as far as a couple other ones on my shelf that I found, I also realized that I still had The Love That Split the World by Emily Henry. When she was writing more YA magical realism books, I have picked this one up. I read another one of hers, A Million Junes, and I enjoyed that one quite a bit. And I've read a couple of her newer adult romances, but I would love to get back into this one. This one, we're following Natalie. It's her last summer in her small Kentucky hometown, and it's off to a magical start, until she starts seeing the wrong things. At first, they're just momentary glimpses. Her front door is red instead of the usual green. There's a preschool where the garden store should be. But then her whole town disappears for hours, fading away into rolling hills and grazing buffalo, and Nat knows something isn't right. Then there are the visits from the kind and mysterious apparition she calls grandmother, who tells her, "You have 3 months to save him." The next night, under the stadium lights of the high school football field, she meets a beautiful boy named Beau, and it's as if time just stops and nothing exists. Nothing except Natalie and Beau. So maybe there is a little bit of romance in this one. I don't know. I am excited to see a little bit more of what Emily Henry had done with some of her magical realism books from before. So that one is a possibility. And then also The Deepest Roots. I read a different book by Miranda Acevedo and really enjoyed it. It was kind of a magical realism book, although I can't remember the name of it at the moment. I don't know why I always forget the name of this book, but it's a really good story, and I really enjoyed the family ties aspect of this girl who finds out a little bit more about a family she didn't know about, and that she has this gift that all the women in the family kind of have their own magical gifts. And so it just sprinkles in a little bit of magical fun, but it is set in the real world. So this one, The Deepest Roots, we have Cottonwood Hollow. Kansas is a strange place. For the past century, every girl has been born with a special talent, like the ability to fix any object, heal any wound, or find what is missing. So it kind of has similar vibes, where all the girls seem to have just like a little something that they can do. The best friends, Rome, Lux, and Mercy, their abilities often feel more like a curse. Rome may be able to fix anything she touches, but that won't help her mom pay rent or make it any easier to confide in Lux and Mercy about what's going on at home. Lux's ability to attract any man with a smile has always meant danger, and although Mercy can make enough of whatever is needed, even that won't help when her friendship with Rome and Lux is tested. As Rome struggles to keep her friendships close, she discovers the truth about life in Cottonwood Hollow. That friends are stronger than curses, that trust is worth the risk, and sometimes what you've been looking for has been under your feet the whole time. So this one seems like kind of a little bit more about this friendship group and them kind of tightening those ties versus the other one I read was more about a family tightening their ties together. And so I'm excited to see what more she has, and I would love to read this. It says 3 unusual friends, 1 inescapable bond. So that sounds wonderful. And so that's going to kind of close out the magical realism section here. And we're going to pop into my podcast section. So I will just start, we'll mix it up on this section, and I will start with a couple books that have podcast elements in it that I really, really enjoyed and loved. So I've got 2 here. I've got Sadie by Courtney Summers and The Night Swim by Megan Golden. And these are both phenomenal. I adored them. So Sadie, we have Sadie, she went missing, and this true crime podcast guy ends up getting involved. And at first he's like, girls go missing all the time. Why am I caring about this? But then he finds out that her sister was murdered a year before. And so then he gets a little more intrigued. So we're following from both their perspectives. Sadie, as she's kind of journeying from a little bit before she goes missing to after, and her journey. And then we're also following the podcast host and his journey as he's following behind Sadie, trying to figure out where she went. And so there's some parallels between the two as they're going on this journey, but it felt so real life, and it was just incredible. And then The Night Swim, we have a true crime podcast, a gal who's following this case, and it's her first, like, she hasn't gone to like a cold case, but she's following actually the case in court, and then also reporting on it and like interviewing people involved and stuff. And it's all based around this case that is in this small town. This girl is saying that the like football star, I can't remember if it was football, but some kind of sports star, he raped her. And half the town, you know, is very behind her, but half of them are like, oh, you can't say this about our star. And just this whole, oh my gosh, they just do such a wonderful job talking about this topic. It's just maddening, but incredible. So those are my podcast recommendations. Now I do have a few podcast books that I'm really excited about. So the first one that I have here is The Girls Are Never Gone by Sarah Glenn Marsh. In this one, we have Dare, and she's a supernatural skeptic, but she's also the voice of Attachments, which is a paranormal investigation podcast. So we're kind of at odds there. But she actually ends up going out to Arlington Estate, and she's going to look into a 30-year-old teenager who was apparently drowned out there in the Arlington's lake. And the legend is that her spirit haunts this lake. And so she's out there. She really thinks it's actually a living culprit, but she's trying to keep an open mind. And it sounds like she brings along a couple friends and some weird things start happening. So very intrigued to have kind of a more podcast book based around like paranormal investigation. Like that's totally up my alley. Then I have The Children on the Hill by Jennifer McMahon. And this one actually is based on Frankenstein, which I'm like, oh, okay, interesting. I'm not sure how much of the podcast elements are in this book, but we have a couple different timelines. We have 1978. Dr. Helen Hildreth is a renowned psychiatrist who works with the mentally ill, but at home she's grand to Vi and Eric. Then one day she ends up bringing home another child, Iris, who's going to be staying with them, but she really doesn't behave like a normal girl. So Vi and Eric end up inviting her to join their monster club, where they end up cataloging monsters and imagining ways that they can defeat these monsters. And the three of them end up really just doing everything together. Then we have in 2019, we're following Lizzie, and she is a popular podcast host, and she has this and her podcast is called Monsters Among Us. So she's going to be traveling to Vermont, where this girl has gone missing and a monster has been sighted. And she's determined to hunt it down because Lizzie knows that monsters are real, because her sister is one of them. So I'm not sure if we're talking about like two different people, or if somehow the kid from the older timeline is Lizzie's sister. I'm not totally sure how that's going to work out, but I'm very, very intrigued. And I've read Jennifer McMahon before, and I've enjoyed her stuff, so we'll see. And then my last podcast one here is Girl 11. And this is by Amy Sweeter Clark. And in this one, we are following Elle, who she used to be a social worker, but now she hosts a popular true crime podcast, and she tackles cold cases on it based on child abductions. So she's had 2 successful seasons so far in actually solving some of these different crimes, and she is ready to take on the Countdown Killer, which she's been wanting to do and is kind of the big thing, right? So 20 years ago, he had this ritualistic pattern to how he abducted these children, and then all of a sudden he just stopped, and nobody really knew why, never figured out who it was, what happened at all. So she ends up starting up the podcast on it, and she has a listener who phones in with a tip. And so she's going to go meet this listener and do an interview. But when she arrives, the listener is dead. And a few days later, the Countdown Killer seems to be started all over again. Somebody's abducting kids in the same exact manner. So she's like, oh my gosh, should I open this all back up again? And so, I mean, that sounds really, really interesting, and I'm really curious about that one too. So that's my spring TBR. I think there's probably, after the ones I added in, like 15 or 16 books, which really isn't bad over a few months. Like, I mean, that's not bad at all. So we'll see. Maybe I'll get to all of them. I don't know. But I'm really excited for all of them. And I hope you guys got something out of this. But I would really love to hear a little bit more about what kind of books you guys like to read in spring. Tell me what vibes work for you. So leave me some like flower emojis down below if you don't feel like totally chatting. And have an absolutely wonderful day. Bye, guys.